The morning sun peeked through the tall windows of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, casting long golden streaks across the polished floor. Travelers hurried in every direction, rolling suitcases, checking phones, sipping coffee. But 10-year-old Amari Vance moved differently. She walked calmly beside her mother, her small hand resting lightly on the handle of her own carry-on, her eyes taking in everything without rushing. She wore a navy blue blazer over a soft white shirt, the kind of outfit that said she was used to places like this, used to being seen but not always understood. Her mother, Dr. Nia Vance, adjusted the strap of her laptop bag and glanced down with a quiet smile. "You ready for Geneva?" she asked. Amari nodded. "As long as they have hot chocolate that doesn't taste like melted crayons." Nia laughed softly. "I'll make sure of it." They weren't just flying for vacation. Nia was a pediatric neurologist, and in Geneva, she'd be presenting new research on childhood epilepsy, a breakthrough that could change how doctors around the world treated certain seizure disorders. Amari had heard her talk about it for months, watched her practice her slides late into the night, seen the way her eyes lit up when she explained how this work might help kids like Mateo, the boy from down the street who'd been in and out of hospital since he was 5. Amari didn't fully grasp all the science, but she understood what mattered. Her mom was trying to make things better for people who couldn't always speak up for themselves. That kind of quiet strength ran in their family. They reached their gate just as boarding began. First class. Not because they were showing off. Nia had flown coach for years, but because this trip was funded by a medical foundation, and they'd insisted on covering the full cost, including premium seating. "You'll need to be sharp when you land," the program director had said. "Rest well on the way." Amari had flown first class before, but it never felt normal. Not because she didn't belong, she knew she did, but because other people's eyes sometimes said otherwise. She'd learned to ignore it. At 10, she already knew how to read a room. The slight pause when someone saw her sitting in a plush leather seat, the way some passengers would glance at her mother as if checking for a uniform, the unspoken question hanging in the air. How did they get here? But today she was tired of thinking about that. She just wanted to draw. She opened her sketchbook, a thick, well-loved thing with a frayed cover, and flipped to a fresh page. On it, she'd started sketching clouds the night before, trying to capture how they looked from 35,000 feet. Soft, endless, weightless. They stepped onto the plane. Cool air, the low hum of engines, the scent of leather and cleaning spray. A flight attendant with short silver-streaked hair and a name tag that read Claudine greeted them with a warm but professional smile. "Dr. Vance?" "And Amari. Right this way." They settled into their seats, wide, comfortable, with plenty of legroom. Amari tucked her sketchbook into the pocket in front of her and buckled her seatbelt with practiced ease. She watched out the window as ground crew moved about, as other passengers filed in. Everything felt calm, routine. Then about 10 minutes before departure, Claudine returned. This time her smile was tighter, her posture stiffer. She leaned in slightly, voice lowered as if sharing a secret she didn't want overheard. "Dr. Vance," she began, "I'm so sorry to trouble you, but we've had a last-minute request from another passenger. A diplomat, high-level delegation from the EU. He's been reassigned to economy due to a booking error, and he's asked if someone in first might be willing to switch seats so he can have a window in the front. It's protocol for certain diplomatic ranks," and Nia raised an eyebrow. "And you're asking us to move to economy?" Claudine hesitated. "Just Amari, actually. There's a single seat open back there, and we'd upgrade someone else to keep you in your spot. It's only for the flight." Amari looked up. Her voice was quiet but clear. "Why me?" Claudine blinked. "Well, you're traveling with your mother, and it's just one seat. We thought it might be easier." "Easier for who?" Amari asked. Nia placed a gentle hand on her daughter's knee but didn't interrupt. She'd taught Amari to speak up, to ask questions, especially when something felt off. And this felt off. Claudine shifted her weight. "It's just standard procedure in these situations. We always try to accommodate diplomatic requests when possible." "But I paid for this seat," Amari said. "Well, my mom did, and I'm not doing anything wrong." "No, of course not," Claudine said quickly. "It's not about that. It's just a courtesy." Amari studied the woman's face, the slight tension around her eyes, the way she kept glancing toward the back of the cabin. Then slowly, Amari unzipped her small backpack and pulled out a folded program from her grandfather's memorial service 2 years ago. On the cover was a black and white photo of a dignified man in a sharp suit, standing beside a vintage airplane. Beneath it, in elegant script, Elijah Vance, a life in service to the skies. She didn't show it to Claudine. She just held it for a second, then tucked it away. "Okay," Amari said finally. "I'll move. But you should know my last name is Vance." The words landed like a stone in still water. Claudine froze. Her eyes widened just slightly. She took in Amari's face again. Not as a child who might be out of place, but as someone whose name carried weight in this very industry. Her lips parted, but no sound came out for a beat too long. "Vance?" she finally whispered. Amari nodded. Claudine's hand flew to her earpiece. I need to check something," she stammered. "Please stay right here. Don't move." And just like that, she turned and walked briskly toward the front of the plane. Her usual composure cracked. Nia exhaled slowly. "You okay?" Amari shrugged, but her fingers tightened around her sketchbook. "I'm tired of being the one who has to prove I belong." Nia reached over and smoothed a curl behind her daughter's ear. "You don't have to prove anything. But sometimes people need reminding." In the cockpit, the captain was reviewing final pre-flight checks when Claudine knocked lightly on the door. She stepped inside, her voice low and urgent. "Sir, we have a situation. The child in 1B, her name is Amari Vance. The captain, a man named Raphael who'd been flying for 23 years, paused. Vance as in Elijah Vance?" "Yes, sir. His granddaughter." Raphael let out a slow breath. He'd met Elijah once, decades ago, at an aviation safety conference. The man had spoken for only 10 minutes, but everyone in the room remembered it. He'd said, "An airline isn't just metal and fuel. It's trust. And trust starts the moment a passenger steps on board, no matter their skin, their accent, or their seat assignment." Raphael stood. "I'll handle this." Back in first class, passengers were starting to notice the tension. A man in 2A glanced over, then whispered to his wife. Amari pretended not to see. She opened her sketchbook again and began drawing the curve of the wing outside her window, her pencil moving in smooth, steady lines. But inside, her heart was racing. Not from fear, but from the unfairness of it all. Why did her name have to be the thing that made people treat her fairly? Why wasn't her presence enough? Then the cockpit door opened. Captain Raphael walked down the aisle, his uniform crisp, his expression calm but serious. He stopped at Amari's row and crouched slightly so he was at her eye level. "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice warm but respectful. "My name is Captain Ortega. I just wanted to personally apologize for the confusion earlier. There's been a misunderstanding with our seating protocol, and it's being corrected immediately. You are absolutely welcome to stay in your seat for the entire flight." Amari looked at him. "What about the diplomat?" "He's been informed that diplomatic status doesn't override basic courtesy," Raphael said gently. "Especially not when it comes to someone whose family helped shape this airline's values." He turned to Nia. "Dr. Vance, please accept our sincere apologies. We'll make sure this doesn't happen again." Nia nodded. "Thank you." As Raphael walked back to the cockpit, Claudine returned, her face flushed with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry," she said quietly, her voice thick with regret. "I didn't realize—" "I should have checked the manifest more carefully." Amari looked up at her. "It's okay," she said. And she meant it. Not because what happened was right, but because she saw the woman's remorse was real. The plane pushed back from the gate. Engines roared to life. Outside, the tarmac blurred as they taxied toward the runway. Amari leaned her head against the window, watching Atlanta shrink below. She thought about her grandfather, about how he used to say, "The sky doesn't care who you are, but people do, so we have to teach them better." She opened her sketchbook to a new page. This time she didn't draw clouds. She drew a little girl in a navy blazer, sitting tall in her seat, looking out at the world with quiet confidence. And above her, in tiny letters, she wrote, "I belong here." The wheels lifted off the ground. The city fell away. And for the first time that day, Amari felt light again. Not because she'd won anything, but because she hadn't let anyone make her feel small. The plane leveled out at cruising altitude, and the cabin settled into that familiar rhythm of mid-flight calm, soft murmurs, the clink of ice in glasses, the occasional rustle of a blanket. Amari had her sketchbook open again, but this time she wasn't drawing. she was thinking. About her grandfather. About the way his voice used to fill a room without ever raising it. About how he'd sit at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee, reading letters from people he'd never met, passengers who'd written just to thank him for making them feel seen. Elijah Vance hadn't set out to be a pioneer. He'd started as a baggage handler at LaGuardia in 1967, back when the idea of a black man in a suit running an airline was something people laughed about behind closed doors. But Elijah didn't laugh. He listened. He learned. He showed up early, stayed late, and asked questions no one else dared to ask, like why the safety briefings never showed women or people of color, or why the hiring forms had boxes that felt more like barriers than invitations. By the time he became vice president of operations for one of the country's largest carriers in the 1980s, he wasn't just managing schedules and budgets. He was reshaping culture. He insisted that flight simulators include scenarios involving passengers with disabilities. He pushed for crew training that addressed unconscious bias, not as a lecture but as part of everyday professionalism. And when the airline faced bankruptcy in '89, while others cut corners, Elijah doubled down on inclusion, arguing that trust was the only asset they couldn't afford to lose. Amari had heard these stories not as history lessons, but as bedtime tales. Grandpa didn't change the world in one day, her mother used to say. He changed it one passenger at a time. Now, flying over the Appalachians, Amari wondered if Claudine, the flight attendant who'd asked her to move, had ever heard those stories. Probably not. Most people didn't know the names behind the policies. They just lived with the results for better or worse. Up front, Claudine was still flustered. She kept glancing toward 1B, as if expecting Amari to vanish or scold her. Instead, the girl sat quietly, occasionally sipping water, occasionally sketching. There was no anger in her posture, no performance of hurt. Just presence. And that somehow made it harder to ignore. A few rows back, the diplomat, a man in his 50s with a neatly trimmed beard and a crisp gray suit, leaned toward his aide and whispered, "Who is that child? Why did they stop the seat change?" The aide, younger and more plugged in, tapped his phone quickly. Her grandfather was Elijah Vance, the aviation reform guy. Big in the 90s. His family still has influence. The diplomat frowned. "I didn't realize. I just assumed it was a mistake. First class is usually, well. His aide didn't respond. He just looked away out the window as if the clouds held an answer he couldn't say aloud. Back in 1B, Nia reached over and gently touched Amari's shoulder. "You okay?" Amari nodded. "I was just thinking about Grandpa's notebook." "What notebook?" "The one he kept in his desk drawer. The one with all the little notes about things people said to him on planes." Nia smiled faintly. "Oh, that one." He called it his progress ledger. "Yeah, he didn't write down the mean stuff to stay mad. He wrote it down to see if things were getting better." "And were they?" Amari shrugged. "Sometimes, but not always fast enough," Nia sighed. She knew that feeling. In her own field, she'd lost count of how many times colleagues had assumed she was a nurse instead of the lead neurologist, or how often hospital administrators had questioned her methods simply because they came from a black woman. Progress wasn't a straight line. It zigzagged, stalled, sometimes looped back on itself. Just then, Captain Raphael's voice came over the intercom. Not the usual ladies and gentlemen script, but something softer, more personal. "Before we continue our flight to Geneva, I'd like to take a moment to thank our passengers for your patience and understanding. At this airline, we believe every guest deserves dignity from the moment they step on board, regardless of where they sit, what they look like, or who they're traveling with. That's not just policy. It's principle, and today we were reminded of that in the best possible way." A few passengers exchanged glances. Some nodded. Others looked confused. But Amari understood. He wasn't just apologizing. He was teaching. Later, as lunch was served, warm rolls, roasted chicken, a small dish of berries, Claudine approached their row again. This time she carried a small tray with an extra dessert, a slice of dark chocolate cake with a single raspberry on top. "For you," she said to Amari, placing it gently on the tray table. It's our signature cake. Your grandfather used to order it on every long-haul flight, said it reminded him of his wife's baking." Amari looked up, surprised. My grandma made chocolate cake? She did, Claudine said, her voice softening. And your grandfather always shared it with the crew. Said flying was a team sport. For the first time, Amari smiled. Not a polite one, but a real one, warm and unguarded. He would have liked you, she said. Claudine's eyes glistened. I wish I'd known him. You still can, Amari said, and pulled out her sketchbook. She flipped to a page near the back, where she'd drawn a portrait of Elijah. His kind eyes, his slight smile, the way he always wore his watch on the inside of his wrist. This is him. Claudine stared at the drawing for a long moment. You're really good, she whispered. I draw what matters, Amari said simply. As Claudine walked away, Nia watched her daughter with quiet pride. She'd always known Amari was observant, thoughtful beyond her years. But today she saw something new, a quiet strength that wasn't loud or defiant but steady, like a deep river carving its path through stone. Hours passed. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in streaks of orange and violet. Amari dozed off for a while, her head resting against the window, her sketchbook open on her lap. When she woke, she found a folded note tucked into the pages. She opened it carefully. In neat handwriting, it read, "Thank you for reminding us who we're supposed to be. C." She tucked the note into her backpack next to her grandfather's memorial program. Later, as the plane began its descent into Geneva, the cabin lights brightened. Passengers stirred, stretching, gathering belongings. The diplomat from earlier stood and walked slowly down the aisle. He stopped at Amari's row. "May I speak with you for a moment?" he asked, his tone careful. Amari looked up. "Sure," he cleared his throat. "I want to apologize. I asked to have you moved without thinking, without considering what that might say or how it might feel. I assumed wrongly, and I'm sorry." Amari studied him. She could tell he meant it. But she also knew sincerity wasn't enough. "What if I hadn't been a Vance?" she asked. "What if I was just a black girl in first class? Would it have been okay then?" The man hesitated. He wanted to say yes, that he'd never treat anyone unfairly, but the truth was messier. He'd acted on instinct, on years of unexamined assumptions about who belongs where, and now faced with a 10-year-old who saw right through him, he had no easy answer. I don't know," he admitted quietly, "but I'll think about it. Every time I fly from now on." Amari nodded. That was all she needed, not a perfect apology, but honesty. As the wheels touched down in Geneva, the cabin filled with the soft applause that sometimes happens after a smooth landing. Amari gathered her things, zipping her backpack, tucking her sketchbook safely inside. Outside, the Swiss Alps glittered in the distance, snow-capped and serene. Nia squeezed her hand. "Proud of you," she said. "For what?" "For being you. For holding your ground without losing your kindness," Amari smiled. "Grandpa always said the sky belongs to everyone. I just reminded them." They walked off the plane together, not as victims of a slight, but as witnesses to a moment. One small, human moment that might ripple outward. Because change didn't always come from speeches or protests. Sometimes it came from a child saying her name and making the world pause long enough to remember what it meant. The cool Swiss air hit Amari's face the moment she stepped off the jet bridge. Crisp and clean in a way that felt different from Atlanta's thick humidity. She took a deep breath, her fingers still curled around the strap of her backpack, her sketchbook tucked safely inside like a secret companion. Around her, Geneva Airport buzzed with the quiet efficiency of a place used to hosting diplomats, scientists, and world travelers. But Amari didn't feel like any of those. She just felt like herself. A 10-year-old girl who'd had a strange morning on a plane and was now ready for hot chocolate that didn't taste like melted crayons. Nia walked beside her, rolling her carry-on with one hand and checking her phone with the other. A message had just come through from the conference organizers. "So glad you've landed. We've arranged a car to take you to the hotel. Also, your session has been moved to the main hall. Demand is higher than expected." Amari glanced up. "Does that mean lots of people want to hear Mom talk about brain stuff?" "It means," Nia said with a small laugh, "that people care about helping kids like Mateo. And that's a good thing." They followed the signs to baggage claim, then to arrivals. As they stepped through the glass doors, a man in a dark overcoat and a neatly knotted scarf stood waiting, holding a sign that read, "Dr. Nia Vance, Global Health Forum." He spotted them immediately and approached with a respectful nod. "Dr. Vance, I'm Lucas. I'll be your driver to the hotel, and he paused, glancing at Amari. I was also asked to give you this. He handed Amari a slim envelope with her name written in elegant script. She opened it carefully. Inside was a note and a small embossed keycard. The note read, "Welcome to Geneva, Amari. Your suite has been prepared. We hope you'll feel at home. Monsieur Dubois, CEO, Horizon Airways Europe." Amari looked up, surprised. "They got us a suite?" Lucas smiled. "Actually, it's just for you. Your mother has her own room. But the airline arranged a connecting suite for you, with a view of the lake and a desk for drawing. Mr. Dubois said your grandfather once told him that a child's imagination needs space to breathe." Nia raised an eyebrow. "Touched but cautious. That's incredibly thoughtful." As they settled into the sleek black car, Amari pressed her forehead to the window, watching Geneva unfold. Narrow streets lined with chestnut trees, trams gliding silently along tracks, the distant shimmer of Lake Geneva under the late afternoon sun. It all felt dreamlike, but her mind kept circling back to the flight, to the way the crew had changed the moment they heard her last name. Not because she'd demanded anything, but because her name carried a story they recognized. At the hotel, a grand old building with ivy climbing its stone walls, they were greeted by a concierge who seemed to already know who they were. "Ms. Vance," he said warmly, "your room is ready. And we've stocked the minibar with your favorite, Swiss hot chocolate mix and almond biscuits." Amari blinked. "How did you know?" "Your grandfather stayed here many times," the concierge said. "He always ordered the same, said it reminded him of flying over the Alps with your grandmother." Later, after unpacking and washing up, Amari sat cross-legged on the plush rug in her suite, sketchbook open. She wasn't drawing clouds or planes this time. She was sketching faces. The flight attendant Claudine, the diplomat with his hesitant apology, Captain Raphael crouching to meet her eye level. Each face told a story: confusion, regret, respect. She added tiny details: the silver streak in Claudine's hair, the way the diplomat kept twisting his wedding ring when he spoke, the small scar above Raphael's eyebrow. She was so absorbed that she didn't hear the knock at first. When she finally opened the door, she found not hotel staff but a man in his late 50s with kind eyes and salt and pepper hair, wearing a tailored suit but no tie. He held a leather portfolio under one arm. "Amari?" he asked gently. She nodded. "My name is Marcel Dubois," he said. "I lead Horizon Airways here in Europe, and I was mentored by your grandfather." Amari stepped back instinctively, not out of fear but awe. "You knew Grandpa?" "I did," Marcel said, his voice softening. "He hired me when I was 28 and thought I knew everything. He taught me that leadership isn't about control, it's about listening, especially to those who aren't usually heard." He stepped inside only when she gestured, and he sat on the edge of the armchair, careful not to crowd her space. "When I heard what happened on the flight today, I felt ashamed. Not because our crew was unkind, they were following what they thought was protocol, but because we failed to see the person behind the seat assignment. And that's exactly what your grandfather spent his life fighting against." Amari looked down at her sketchbook. "It wasn't their fault they didn't know me, but it shouldn't have taken my name to make them treat me fairly." Marcel nodded slowly. "You're right, and that's why I'm here. Not just to apologize, but to ask for your help." Amari looked up, surprised. "Our training programs, they're good, but they're not enough. We teach crew how to handle emergencies, how to serve meals, how to follow security rules. But we don't always teach them how to see people, really see them without assumptions. I'd like to create something new. A youth advisory panel. Kids like you from all over the world, who can tell us what flying feels like from your seat." Amari was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked, "Would you actually listen?" "Every word," Marcel said. "Your grandfather used to say, if you want to fix the sky, ask the ones who look up at it." She thought about Matteo back home, who'd never flown because his seizures made long trips risky. She thought about her friend Zara, who used a wheelchair and once told her how exhausting it was to fly because no one ever seemed to know how to help without making her feel like a burden. She thought about the little boy on the plane who'd stared at her blazer like it was a costume. "Okay," she said, "but I don't want it to be just about famous names. I want it to be about kids who don't get listened to ever." Marcel's eyes lit up. "That's exactly the point. Before he left, he handed her a small box. Inside was a vintage airline pin, gold wings with a tiny Vance insignia etched on the back. Your grandfather gave me one just like it on my first day as manager. Now I'm passing it to you. That night, after Marcel left, Amari sat at the desk by the window, the lake glittering below. She pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began to write. Not a complaint, not a demand, but a letter. Dear Horizon Airways, she wrote. Thank you for listening. But real change doesn't happen because of one name. It happens when every child, no matter where they're from or what they look like, feels like they belong in the sky. I'd like to help make that true. Here's what I think. She listed ideas. Training that includes real stories from young passengers, cabin crews learning basic sign language or how to assist travelers with sensory sensitivities, even something as simple as having picture menus for kids who can't read yet. She drew a quick sketch at the bottom, a plane with windows showing all kinds of faces, a girl in a hijab, a boy with cochlear implants, an older woman with a service dog, a non-binary teen with colorful hair. Everyone belongs in the sky, she wrote beneath it. The next morning, over breakfast in the hotel cafe, real Swiss hot chocolate, rich and smooth, just like her grandfather liked. Nia read the letter. You wrote this last night? She asked, amazed. Amari nodded, stirring her cocoa. I just said what I wish someone had asked me before. Nia folded the letter carefully. You know, your grandfather would have framed this. He'd probably say I need to add more data, Amari said with a small smile. Maybe. But he'd also be proud that you turned a moment of hurt into something that could help others. Later that day, as Nia prepared for her keynote speech, Amari wandered down to the hotel garden. She found a quiet bench beneath a chestnut tree and opened her sketchbook again. This time she drew her grandfather not as a legend, but as a man sitting on a park bench feeding pigeons, his eyes crinkled with laughter. She didn't know it yet, but that letter would travel farther than she imagined. Marcel would share it with executives across 3 continents. Within weeks, it would spark meetings, pilot programs, even a new hiring initiative for youth voices in aviation design. But for now, in that quiet garden in Geneva, Amari was just a girl with a pencil and a memory, drawing the man who taught her that dignity wasn't something you earned. It was something you carried and something you gave. And sometimes all it took was saying your name to remind the world of that truth. The days in Geneva passed in a quiet rhythm. Mornings filled with the soft hum of conference halls, afternoons spent wandering cobbled streets, and evenings curled up by the window with hot chocolate and her sketchbook. Amari had expected the trip to be about her mother's work, about science and speeches and serious adults in suits. She hadn't expected it to become something else entirely, a turning point. It started with a simple email. 2 days after her letter to Horizon Airways, Marcel Dubois sent a reply, not through her mother but directly to Amari, using the email address she'd scribbled at the bottom of her note. The subject line read, "You've changed the conversation." Inside was a message that made her sit up straighter in her chair. He wrote that her letter had been shared with the airline's global leadership team. Not just read, discussed, debated, and most importantly, believed. They wanted to move forward with her idea. A youth advisory panel, but not just as a side project. They wanted it to be official, funded, and integrated into their customer experience division. And they wanted Amari to be its first honorary ambassador. She showed the email to Naya over breakfast, her voice steady but her eyes wide with disbelief. They really mean it, Naya said, reading the words again. They're not just saying thank you and moving on. They're listening. Amari stirred her oatmeal slowly. What if I say something and they don't like it? Then they'll have to decide if they really want honesty or just a nice story, Nia replied. But from what I've seen of Marcel, he's the real deal. Later that afternoon, Marcel invited them to the Horizon Airways European headquarters, a sleek glass building on the edge of the city, overlooking the lake. Amari wore her navy blazer again, not because she had to, but because it felt like armor and comfort all at once. Inside, the lobby was quiet, modern, with soft lighting and walls lined with photographs of planes, crews, and passengers from around the world. In one corner, near the reception desk, hung a large framed portrait of Elijah Vance, standing beside a retired Boeing 747, his hand resting on the wing like it was an old friend. Amari stopped in front of it. He looks proud, she whispered. He was, Marcel said, appearing beside her. Not of the planes, but of the people who flew them, and the ones who trusted them enough to get on board. He led them to a sunlit meeting room with floor-to-ceiling windows. Around the table sat 5 people, designers, trainers, customer service leads, each with a copy of Amari's letter in front of them. No one spoke right away. They just waited for her to sit. Then Marcel said, "Amari, we're here because you asked a question no one else dared to. What if I wasn't a Vance?" That question shouldn't exist. But it does, and we owe it to every child to make sure it stops. One of the designers, a woman with bright red glasses and sleeves full of colorful tattoos, leaned forward. "We've started sketching ideas for new crew training modules. But we keep hitting a wall. We're adults. We don't remember what it feels like to be 10 and scared on a plane, or 12 and embarrassed because you don't understand the safety instructions, or 13 and tired of being treated like you don't belong. That's where you come in." Amari took a breath. "It's not just about age. It's about feeling invisible. Like your seat is a mistake." A man in the corner, older with a gentle voice, nodded. "I've been a flight attendant for 32 years. I like to think I'm fair. But today, I realized I've probably made assumptions too. Maybe not out loud, but in my head, and that's just as harmful." The room fell quiet, not awkwardly, but thoughtfully, like everyone was holding space for something real. Amari reached into her backpack and pulled out her sketchbook. She flipped to a page near the middle and turned it toward the table. It was a drawing of a plane cabin, but not the usual layout. Each seat showed a different passenger: a girl with braids and noise-canceling headphones, a boy holding his mom's hand tightly during takeoff, a teenager with a service dog curled at his feet, an elderly woman clutching a photo of her grandchildren. "I drew this after the flight," she said, "because I kept thinking, what if the crew had seen us like this? Not as problems or VIPs or out of place, but just people with stories." The woman with red glasses wiped her eyes quickly. "This should be in every training manual." Marcel smiled. "It will be." They spent the next hour talking, not about policies or procedures, but about moments. Amari described how it felt when Claudine first asked her to move. Not angry, but small. Like her presence was negotiable. She talked about how Captain Raphael changed everything just by crouching down to her level. How that simple act said, "You matter here." She even mentioned the diplomat's apology, not to shame him, but to show that people can change if they're willing to be honest. By the end of the meeting, they'd outlined the first steps of the Vance Youth Fellowship, a rotating group of young people from different backgrounds, ages 10 to 17, who would meet quarterly with Horizon Airways teams to share feedback, test new cabin designs, and help shape how crews are trained. They'd be paid for their time, given travel support, and, most importantly, their input would directly influence real decisions. Before they left, Marcel handed Amari a small wooden box. Inside was a custom-made pin, silver wings with a tiny open book at the center symbolizing stories and listening. Engraved on the back were the words, "The sky belongs to everyone." That evening, back at the hotel, Amari sat on the balcony as the sun dipped behind the Alps. The lake below turned gold, then deep blue. She thought about her grandfather, about how he'd spent his life building systems that tried to be fair, even when the world wasn't. And now, in some small way, she was adding to that work, not with speeches or titles, but with honesty. Nia joined her, handing her a mug of hot chocolate. "Proud of you," she said again, like it was the easiest truth in the world. "I didn't do much," Amari said. "You spoke up when it would have been easier to stay quiet. That's everything." The next morning, before they flew home, Marcel sent one more message. Attached was a press release draft for the Vance Youth Fellowship, set to go live in a week. It included a quote from Amari: "Flying shouldn't feel like a test. It should feel like coming home." She read it 3 times. It sounded like her. Not polished, not perfect, but real. On the flight back to Atlanta, they were met at the gate by Claudine. She wasn't working that day, but she'd come anyway. She handed Amari a small envelope. Inside was a photo, taken from the cockpit window during their flight to Geneva. Below it, in Claudine's handwriting, "For the girl who reminded us why we fly." Amari hugged her, quick and quiet. As they walked through the terminal, Nia asked, "What do you want to do next?" Amari thought for a moment. "I want to find other kids like Matteo and Zara, kids who've never felt welcome on a plane. And I want to make sure they know they belong in the sky too. And just like that, the journey wasn't over. It was just beginning, not with fanfare, but with a notebook, a pencil, and the quiet courage to say, see me, hear me, I'm here. The Nairobi sun rose slow and golden over the acacia trees, painting the sky in soft strokes of peach and lavender. Amari Vance stood at the window of her hotel room, her small suitcase already zipped and waiting by the door. Today she was flying alone, not because her mother didn't want to come, but because this trip was different. This wasn't about conferences or presentations. This was about listening. 6 months had passed since that flight to Geneva. 6 months of emails, video calls, school projects squeezed between meetings, and quiet evenings sketching ideas in her notebook. The Vance Youth Fellowship had launched quietly at first. Just 5 kids from different corners of the world, each with their own story of feeling unseen while traveling. But word spread. Applications poured in. By the 3rd meeting, they had 30 young advisors. By the 5th, Horizon Airways had redesigned its entire onboard welcome protocol based on their feedback. Now, Amari was heading to a global youth summit on inclusion in travel. Invited not as a guest, but as a co-creator, she'd be sharing the stage with teens who'd designed wheelchair-accessible lavatories for long-haul flights, kids who'd created sensory-friendly boarding kits for autistic travelers, and others who'd pushed airlines to include more languages and safety videos. None of them were famous. None of them had last names that opened doors. And that, Amari thought, was exactly the point. She touched the pin on her blazer, silver wings with an open book at the center. It had become her quiet signature, a reminder that change didn't need a megaphone. Sometimes it just needed someone willing to speak softly and clearly. At the airport, the check-in line moved quickly. She handed her passport and ticket to the agent, a young woman with braids and a warm smile, her name tag reading, Amina. Amari Vance? Amina asked, glancing at the screen, then back at her. Her eyes lit up with recognition, but not the kind that made Amari feel like a spectacle. It was the look of someone who'd read her letter, who'd seen the training videos that now played in crew orientations worldwide. Welcome aboard, Amina said, stamping the boarding pass with care. Seat 3A, window just like you like it, Amari smiled. You remembered? We all did, no questions. No hesitation. No assumption that a 10-year-old traveling alone didn't belong in business class, especially not when the airline had updated its unaccompanied minor policy to prioritize comfort over cost, thanks to feedback from the fellowship. On the jet bridge, another attendant waited, this one in her early 20s, with a bright yellow scarf and a calm presence. She introduced herself as Zawadi. I'll be your cabin lead today, she said. And I just want you to know, we've got your favorite snack on board. Dark chocolate almonds, Amari blinked. How? Zawadi grinned. Your profile in the crew briefing. You're kind of a legend around here. But it wasn't fame Amari wanted. It was normalcy. And today, for the first time, it felt within reach. As the plane taxied down the runway, she opened her sketchbook to a fresh page. She didn't draw clouds or wings this time. She drew faces, the kids she'd met through the fellowship. There was Mateo, now flying for the first time with a seizure response kit approved by the airline's medical team. There was Zara, who'd helped design a new boarding ramp that worked with her wheelchair without needing 3 staff members and 20 minutes of awkward maneuvering. There was Kofi, who'd suggested adding braille labels to seat numbers, and Layla, who'd pushed for gender-neutral lavatory signs on international flights. Each face was different. Each story mattered. Halfway through the flight, Zawadi brought her a cup of warm milk with honey, something Amari had mentioned once in a feedback session as calming during turbulence. We're trying to remember the little things, Zawadi said softly, because they're not little to you. Amari thanked her, then asked, Do you ever get pushback? From passengers who don't understand why we're changing things? Zawadi sat in the jump seat across from her, keeping her voice low. Sometimes. An older man last week complained that the new welcome message, "We're glad you're here no matter who you are," was too political. I told him, "Sir, kindness isn't politics. It's just how we fly now." Amari liked that. How we fly now, not how we used to. Not how some people wish it still was, but how it could be, and was becoming. When the plane landed in Nairobi, Amari was met not by a driver but by 2 girls her age, Asha and Nima, both members of the fellowship from East Africa. They'd been paired as her local guides for the summit. "You're really her," Asha said, eyes wide. "We read your letter in school. Our teacher said it changed how our country's national carrier trains its staff." Nima handed her a small woven bracelet. "It means you belong here. My grandmother made it." Amari slipped it onto her wrist. It felt warm, like a promise. Over the next 3 days, the summit buzzed with energy. Workshops filled with laughter, debate, and the kind of hope that comes from shared purpose. Amari didn't give a big speech. Instead, she sat in circles, listening more than talking. She heard about border crossings that felt like interrogations, about kids who'd been separated from parents during layovers because staff didn't understand their family structure, about the exhaustion of explaining your identity just to get a seat. And she shared too, not as an expert, but as someone who'd been there. "I used to think I had to prove I belonged," she said during one session. "Now I know I just have to show up, and keep showing up." On the final evening, under a sky thick with stars, the group gathered around a fire. Someone brought out drums. Someone else started singing in Swahili. Amari sat between Asha and Nima, her sketchbook open on her lap. She wasn't drawing faces anymore. She was drawing hands, reaching, holding, helping. Back in Atlanta a week later, a package waited at her door. Inside was a thick binder labeled Vance Youth Fellowship, Year 1 Impact Report. Flipping through it, Amari saw photos of new crew training simulations, quotes from young travelers, data showing a 40% drop in passenger complaints related to bias or exclusion on Horizon Airways flights. But what made her pause was the last page. It was a full-color print of her original sketch, the one from Geneva with all the different faces in the plane windows. Beneath it, in bold letters, was a new airline slogan, now rolling out on every ticket, every screen, every uniform patch. "Everyone belongs in the sky." Her mother found her sitting on the porch that evening, the report open on her lap. "They're really doing it," Nia said, sitting beside her. "Yeah," Amari said. "But it's not just them. It's everyone who said, 'Me too.'" A few weeks later, she got an email from Claudine, the flight attendant from that first flight. She was now leading a new training module called Seeing the Passenger, Not the Seat. Attached was a photo of her standing in front of a classroom of new recruits, Amari's letter pinned to the board behind her. "You gave us a mirror," Claudine wrote. "And we're learning to look." Amari didn't reply right away. Instead, she went to her desk, opened a fresh page in her sketchbook, and began to draw again. This time, it was a plane flying into sunrise, its windows glowing with light. In each one, a different child looked out, not with uncertainty but with peace. With belonging. She didn't need a famous name to be seen anymore. She'd helped build a world where no child would. And as she closed the sketchbook, the pin on her blazer catching the afternoon sun, she knew her grandfather would be smiling. Not because of what she'd done, but because of what they'd all done together. The sky was bigger than any one of them. And finally, it felt like home.